At a party, my husband and his friends decided to exchange partners for the night. It all started out like any other social gathering. The atmosphere was light, with laughter filling the room as the night went on. John, my husband, was his usual charming self, making everyone laugh with his jokes. I was sitting with the wives, chatting about the usual topics: life, work, and family. But something about that night felt different. There was a certain tension in the air, something unspoken but definitely there. As the drinks kept coming, the conversations became more daring. I noticed John exchanging glances with his friends, Kevin, Mike, and Tom. There were whispers and sly smiles, but I couldn't figure out what they were up to. It wasn't long before Susan, Kevin's wife, made a joke that seemed innocent at first. "What if we swapped partners for the night?" she laughed, expecting everyone to brush it off. But then there was silence. And in that silence, I could feel my heart starting to race. John caught my eye and gave me a playful grin. "Why not? We're all friends, right?" he said, breaking the silence. The group laughed, but the idea lingered. I laughed along, trying to play it cool, thinking it was just a silly joke. But as the minutes passed, it was clear they weren't joking anymore. Before I knew it, agreements were being made, almost casually. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My mind was racing with doubts. Could I really do this? Was this just for fun? Or was something more behind it? John was the first to move. He walked off with Susan, and I found myself standing awkwardly with Mike, John's best friend. We had always been friendly, but in that moment, the dynamic between us shifted. Mike gave me a nervous smile, trying to break the tension with a joke, but it didn't help much. We both knew what was about to happen. And it was nothing like anything we'd ever done before. We moved to a quieter part of the house, away from the others. Sitting there with Mike, I felt a strange mix of emotions: excitement, anxiety, curiosity. As we talked, I found myself opening up to him in ways I never had before. We talked about things we'd never discussed, and suddenly, he didn't feel like just John's friend anymore. There was a connection between us that I hadn't noticed before, and it made the whole situation feel even more intense. Meanwhile, across the room, I saw John with Susan. They were laughing, clearly enjoying themselves, but I wondered if John was feeling as conflicted as I was. What had started as a game was now something much more complicated. As Mike and I talked, I began to feel comfortable, but that comfort was unsettling. Could I really enjoy this? What would happen after tonight? Just when I thought I had a handle on my emotions, things took a sharp turn. Susan, who had been with John, suddenly burst into tears and stormed out of the room. The laughter and carefree atmosphere vanished in an instant. The room went silent, and everyone froze. What was supposed to be a fun, harmless game was falling apart. John quickly followed Susan, leaving me alone with Mike. My mind was spinning. What had started as an exciting experiment now felt dangerous. As if that wasn't enough, the tension between the others began to boil over. Kevin confronted Tom, accusing him of flirting with his wife long before tonight. What had seemed like harmless fun now felt like the opening of Pandora's box. Secrets, jealousy, and old grudges were coming to the surface. And it was clear this night wasn't going to end the way anyone had planned. Mike looked at me, his confidence from earlier fading. "Maybe this wasn't such a good idea," he said softly. For the first time that night, I agreed. The fun had turned into something else entirely. I looked around the room and realized the mood had shifted for everyone. The playful energy was gone, replaced by tension and unspoken fears. I wasn't sure if I could handle what was happening. When John and Susan returned, they both looked shaken. John avoided my eyes, and I knew something had changed between us, even if we weren't ready to admit it yet. As the night dragged on, the couples began to leave, each pair quieter than when they arrived. The tension hung in the air like a fog. Nobody wanted to talk about what had just happened, but we all knew things wouldn't be the same. As John and I walked to the car, I felt a heaviness settle in my chest. The silence between us was loud. I had so many questions, but I wasn't ready to ask them. Finally, I broke the silence. "Do you regret it?" I asked quietly, unsure of what answer I wanted to hear. John didn't look at me. After a long pause, he shook his head. "No, but I think things are going to be different now," he said. The drive home was quiet. Neither of us said much, both lost in our own thoughts. I wasn't sure what the next day would bring, or how this night would change our relationship. As we pulled into the driveway, John reached for my hand. "We'll talk about it tomorrow," he said softly, and that was that. The night ended not with answers but with even more questions. As we entered the house, the silence between us lingered. John walked ahead of me, his steps heavy, like there was a weight between us now that hadn't been there before. I followed, unsure of what to say or do. Should we pretend the night hadn't happened? Could we? Went to the kitchen to pour myself a glass of water, but my hands were trembling so much that I almost dropped the glass. I could hear John upstairs, moving around, but he wasn't coming down. It felt like there was this invisible wall between us, separating us. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted, not just between us but between everyone at the party. I sat at the kitchen table, staring blankly at the glass in front of me. My mind kept replaying the night, Mike's gentle touch, the way we had laughed together, the way John had disappeared with Susan. I had tried to convince myself it was all in good fun, but now, sitting in the quiet of our home, it didn't feel that way anymore. Minutes passed, maybe even hours. I lost track of time. Finally, I heard John coming down the stairs. He stood in the doorway for a moment, watching me. His face was hard to read, a mix of emotions I couldn't quite figure out. Was he angry? Guilty? Confused, like me? He sat down across from me, not saying a word at first. The silence between us was thick, almost suffocating. I took a deep breath and broke it. "What now?" I asked quietly, not sure what answer I was hoping for. John looked down at his hands, then back up at me. "I don't know," he admitted. "I thought it would be different." "Different how?" He hesitated, as if he wasn't sure how to put his thoughts into words. "I thought it would be easy, just a game. No strings attached. But..." His voice trailed off, and he rubbed his forehead like he was trying to make sense of everything. "But it wasn't," I finished for him. I knew exactly what he meant. The whole night had been one big, messy experiment that none of us were prepared for. John nodded. "I didn't expect it to feel like this afterward. I thought we'd just go back to normal." I sighed, feeling the weight of the night pressing down on me. "Can we?" "I don't know," he said again, looking frustrated, like he wanted to fix everything but didn't know how. For a moment, we sat there in silence, neither of us knowing what to say. The night had been thrilling at first, exciting even, but now all I felt was confusion and doubt. Could we really just forget what happened? Could our relationship go back to what it was before? I wasn't so sure anymore. After a long pause, John spoke again, his voice quieter this time. "Did you enjoy it?" He couldn't quite meet my eyes when he asked the question. I didn't answer right away. How could I? I had enjoyed parts of it, the excitement, the newness of it all. But there were other parts I hadn't expected. The feelings that had crept up, the connections that had formed. And now, sitting here with John, I didn't know how to explain it. "I don't know," I finally said, echoing his own words. "It wasn't what I thought it would be." He nodded again, his jaw clenched, like he was holding back something. "Do you think this will change us?" The question hung in the air between us, heavy and full of meaning. It was the question I had been avoiding all night. Would this night, this reckless game we played, change everything? I didn't have an answer. Maybe neither of us did. "I think it already has," I said softly. John didn't respond. He just looked at me, his eyes filled with something I couldn't quite place. Regret? Fear? Understanding? Maybe a little of all three. "I didn't expect to feel this way," he admitted after a moment. "I thought I'd be okay with it, but seeing you with Mike..." He didn't finish the sentence, but he didn't have to. I knew exactly what he meant. I had felt the same thing when I saw him with Susan. A pang of something that wasn't quite jealousy but wasn't far from it either. "I thought it wouldn't matter," I whispered. "But it does, doesn't it?" John nodded slowly, his gaze dropping back to the table. "Yeah, it does." We sat there in the kitchen for what felt like forever, both of us lost in our own thoughts. The silence wasn't uncomfortable anymore, but it wasn't exactly peaceful either. It was the kind of silence that comes when you're standing at the edge of something big, something that could change everything. "I don't want this to ruin us," I said quietly, almost to myself. John looked up at me, his eyes softer now. Me neither. For the first time that night, I felt a little bit of hope. Maybe this didn't have to be the end of us. Maybe we could get through it. But I knew it wouldn't be easy. We had opened a door we couldn't close, and now we had to figure out how to move forward. We'll figure it out, John said, reaching across the table to take my hand. His touch was warm, familiar. It was the first time that night I felt like we were really connected again. I squeezed his hand, holding on to that small bit of comfort. Yeah, I agreed. We will. As we sat there, I felt his hand warm in mine, but it was a different warmth, a hesitant, uncertain warmth, like he was holding on to the hope that we could fix something broken. My heart was beating loudly in the quiet, each thud a reminder of the night we'd just had, and I realized how much I wanted that warmth, his warmth, to mean something. I had thought I wanted the thrill, the chance to break away from our routine. But now, sitting across from him, all I wanted was for things to go back to the way they were, back when I was so sure of us. John, I began, the words catching in my throat. I don't know if we can fix this. My voice cracked, and I looked down, fighting against tears I didn't want to shed. Not now, not when I wanted to seem strong. He tightened his grip on my hand, his fingers warm but unsteady. Hey, don't! He started softly, searching my face. We agreed to it. I was there too, remember? I looked at him, finally, feeling the weight of his gaze. Yes, we both agreed, but I can't shake this feeling. I keep thinking of us, of what we've built. My voice dropped to a whisper, and how close we came to losing it. A flicker of pain crossed his face. Do you think that's what this was about? Losing something? Because honestly, I thought. He trailed off, and a look of vulnerability washed over him that I hadn't seen in years. I thought we were strong enough for this. The words hit me hard, and I wanted to look away, but I held his gaze. I thought so too, John, but tonight, my voice grew shaky, betraying me. I didn't feel strong. I felt lost. I wanted something different, but I don't know if I wanted this. There was a long pause, and I could feel his hand loosen slightly in mine. I panicked, clutching tighter. John, I don't want to lose you. His eyes softened, but there was still a shadow in them, something raw and bruised. I don't want to lose you either, but I don't know what to do with all of this mess. I swallowed hard, gathering the courage to ask the question that had been burning inside me since we left the party. Did you feel anything for her? My voice was barely above a whisper, but it was all I could manage. He didn't answer immediately, and my heart clenched in the silence. Finally, he looked down, his voice low and pained. Not the way I feel about you. The air around us felt heavier, like the room was holding its breath, waiting for one of us to say something to break this tension, to reassure us both that we could come back from this. I wanted so badly to hear him say that he regretted it, that he didn't want anyone but me, that he'd make it right. But he didn't. And somehow, I understood why. It was complicated, messy. I thought I could handle it too, I admitted, each word a release of the emotions I'd kept buried all night. But seeing you with her, it was like watching us fall apart. Like all those years, everything we'd worked for, could be taken away in an instant. He looked at me, his expression softer, as if he was finally seeing me, the real me, the woman who had loved him through everything, who had always been by his side. Maybe we need to remember why we chose each other in the first place, he murmured. I nodded, tears filling my eyes. Maybe we do. And for the first time in hours, I felt like we could find our way back, step by fragile step. It wouldn't be easy, and it wouldn't happen overnight, but I knew one thing: I wanted to try. I wanted us to be more than this night, more than the mistakes we'd made. We owed it to each other.